Welcome to Life by Design, episode 395. Welcome to Life by Design. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Kreisho Jug.
That sounded very like we were opening up a jazz trio. Welcome to.
We did talk about jazz already in the pre-show.
Sounds. What scale is that? It's funny. I've been listening. I've been listening to a lot of music lately.
Yeah,
I'm starting to take guitar playing more seriously. So I'm like, okay, I got to develop my ear a little bit, and jazz has been top of mind lately.
And
I don't love it. I don't love it yet. Like there's some, obviously the talent is there, but I just, and there's a couple of phrases and there's a couple of, they're all awesome. It's just not something that I would put on and be like, wow, this is awesome. I love this,
Jamming out to just a little Miles Davis rocking out.
But I've never liked virtuosity for the sake of virtuosity. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it doesn't matter how fast you can play the notes. I have never listened to shredders. I've never listened to I respect all of them. I've never bought a Steve Vai or Joe Satriani album. Like it just doesn't, it doesn't move me. I like the energy. Like I like awesome rock power.
Mm-hmm. No, I get it. We are creators of Life by Design. With many locations worldwide, each week on the show, we discuss the principles and the practice of Life by Design. And today, Kreisho, we're talking about mental health and specifically talking about a study that you brought up here in the Journal of Psychiatry and Neuroscience. And aside from our, I don't think it's definitive, at least as far as my understanding in terms of the neurotransmitter premise of depression and mental health. But just for the sake of the study, it's interesting to note that there are ways to raise neurotransmitter levels, serotonin, tryptophan, just naturally. And then what we found interesting was a lot of those ways are the same ways that would happen as the blueprint for Life by Design.
Yeah. So, I think the study was originally published because it's been a while since I looked at it. I have to apologize, but I think it was just the concern around the side effects on, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Yeah. And if there was a way to do it that was safer. And this is the data on what ended up being a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about for a lot of years, which I thought was kind of cool that there's actual data, more data coming out than what was originally there when we first started talking about this.
Right. Yeah, and that's the part that I found interesting is, with the approach, most of the drugs are designed to affect the reuptake, right, of serotonin, and somehow that's going to have an effect. And of course, if that was purely the reason for mental health, then taking the medication would, at least at a much higher rate than statistically it seems to in some of the bigger RCTs, it would have a positive effect. So we know that there are studies, large-scale studies, that show that even moderate exercise can outperform some of these medications for depression, and not just mild, but serious depression. So whether or not this is the only thing that's happening in the brain and somehow it's just a top-up theory, right? You're low serotonin, so top up serotonin, somehow that's going to improve your entire mental health. It doesn't matter in the sake of this commentary, other than to say it's interesting that instead of drugs, there are other methods that change your diet, change your environment, that seem to have the same effect. But really, my question is, and this is where I prefer the podcast to go today, is, when it comes to your mental health, what do we think is the most important contributing factor, Kreisho? Well,
there's a lot of contributing factors, and I think the study, I think this is my takeaway. It wasn't a unfortunate conclusion by the authors, but the fact that we're talking about exercise or movement, and we're talking about diet, particularly consuming a diet high in fat. In this case, they talked about omega-3 fat, and we're getting sleep, and we're working on whether they called it mindfulness or however they referred to it in the study. What I wish they would have concluded is these are things that we should be doing whether we have a problem with low serotonin or whatever it is. Like, these are just
Right.
requirements for our body, which really brings us to to the crux of this thing, right? That the fact that you're a human means that you need certain things. Your psychology needs certain things to function correctly. Yes,
Right.
there's, you have a brain, which is a solid tangible thing, but you also have a consciousness which lives somewhere in your brain. But it also has certain requirements, and you need to meet the requirements for both of those things to be able to be mentally healthy.
Yeah, I think what I was getting at, and you included in there, is that really the most important thing is the environment.
Yes, yes.
And then that's where we were going with this was, as you said, there are requirements. We talk a lot about the physiological requirements for the body, whether it be movement or food and fuel and sleep and neurological health, structure, all these different components. But I think one of the big, maybe groundbreaking things for us at Life by Design was the recognition, and this is, mostly you, but the recognition that, our mind had similar requirements. And yes, as you said, the matter has the same requirements as the rest of the matter, but the mind itself and the consciousness has its own set of requirements. And we've identified those as a belief system or a philosophy, the development of self-esteem, having a vision, a purpose, and a plan. And when you have those 5 things in place, or those 5 things are being developed, it's just naturally the expression that the mental health state is better. And we're not using it as a therapeutic intervention in terms of, okay, you're going to do these things and your depression's going to go away, but it's no different than corrective chiropractic. We improve the function of the spine and nervous system, but it doesn't mean that every health challenge this person's experiencing goes away, although many of them do much of the time. It's a very common, side effect. The same would be true for our mental health, that if you actually work towards meeting these 5 things and change the environment, even in cases where people are just struggling severely, or even in cases where it seems to be there's a genetic component, it's repeated, cycle after cycle after cycle. If you were to implement these 5 things, you would have a positive outcome, or at least a significant change in terms of your mental health.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely, agree with that. It's just unfortunate because it's becoming, the requirements are becoming harder to meet.
Yes.
It's like,
Yes.
look, so you mentioned self-esteem, and we just finished, you can't have proper self-esteem where, you're in a position of power and you're forcing people to do something, right? In order for you to have self-esteem in a relationship, that other party has to voluntarily choose to interact with you. Right. It would be horrible to be in a marriage where your partner was interacting with you because of fear that you were going to become abusive or you were going to hurt the other person. That's not a relationship that's going to develop self-esteem on your part. Your self-esteem, comes from the other person wanting, because of who you are, your character, your morality, wanting to be with you. Right. Like we're at the place now where, a kid doesn't make a hockey team and the parents call the coach and say, well, why didn't you put my kid on the hockey team? You need to do it or this is going to happen. Like, it's a threat. Right. Or I'm going to withdraw my funding or we're going to go somewhere else. Like, what is that doing to your child?
Sure.
Now your child knows that they're not good enough, right? Like, it's proven, but because you had to use a threat, what you've essentially done is you've robbed your child the potential to get better at hockey and then make the team on their own merit. And this is the world that we're living in, right? So I don't know. I hate to hate to be Nostradamus, but I think it's going to be harder and harder to experience full mental health just because it's getting, we're living in crazy times. We're at a point now where people can't even make their own decisions regarding their health.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that it's going to get worse before it gets better. And that's even if it gets better. That said, like in any free market, not that we're dealing with a fully free market, but in any free market, you're going to see a diversity, people who are going to struggle, and you're going to see other people excel in this, and we see it with businesses, we see it with individuals, the whole, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, all that type of, commentary. I'd love to see everybody thrive. I think that would be fantastic. And I do think that the 5 steps that we've briefly outlined today would be a starting point. And I know people who are struggling with mental health. I know I've struggled with mental health. I know you've struggled with mental health.
I think we all have, of course.
We've talked about our stories on here before. And, it's in the moment when you're experiencing it. I get it. And it's just easy to say, people don't understand, it's different for you. You don't know what I'm going through. And it's true. I don't know what you're going through. So I don't want to claim that I do. At the same time, somebody else has probably gone through something similar or in some way, shape, or form. And they've found a way to overcome that. And I think that was always for me the solace that I take, is that no matter how challenging something I'm experiencing is, I'm pretty confident there's somebody else who's had the exact same experience and has successfully figured it out. And so because of that, I know that if I go back to those 5 steps, and again, I think there's an awareness, when we look at the 6 pillars of self-esteem, awareness, I believe, being the first one, right, Cracio? Living consciously. So.
Yep.
And so, you've got to get to that point where you're actually aware that, there may be some challenges or some gaps in your thinking, and then you kind of progressively work through the other steps. And I think that, to me, when I take a step back and I think of some of my clients and I think of people who I interact with, that might be the actual most difficult part, is the first step, which is developing an awareness and a consciousness that, there is something that you can do about mental health. Because I know that for many people, they just feel lost and frustrated and distraught, and they're not really sure what to do next. And so I believe that that's the beginning stage of that downward spiral.
So he brings up an interesting point too, that I think is just valuable for somebody listening, that could be in a really, really tough place. Becoming conscious of the fact that you don't want to become conscious. It sounds ridiculous, but it's a starting point, right? The fact that, especially if you've suffered trauma and there's some horrible things that have happened to people, man, it's crazy. But I mean, even coming to terms with the fact that you're not ready to come to terms with what's happened to you is an excellent starting point. It's better than, it's better than not having a starting point.
Yeah. No, it's, you don't know what you don't know. And so that's the first step, is acknowledging there's probably some stuff you don't know. And that starts to open things up and at least kind of sparks the conversation in your mind and can get you going in the right direction. So, guys, I think the take home here for today really is that, whether the serotonin theory and this idea of topping up chemistry is going to be the solution to improve mental health, I don't believe it is. But if that's the case, then there are natural ways to do that. And that's what the study showed, that just by the side effect of doing things that meet the body's needs and requirements, we see changes in areas that people generally are trying to change through pharmaceuticals in order to get an outcome. But really, the big part is, look at those 5 steps, my belief systems. What do I need to do to develop my self-esteem? Can I start creating a vision for my life, even if I don't believe I am able to see it through to this point? Finding a deeper purpose, and then starting an action plan, and then, taking a step. Piece by piece, rinse and repeat over and over again. And so if you check out the 30-day Think by Design Challenge, it's free. And it's Cracio walking you through a lot of these concepts, very short videos, easily consumable. So we'll put that link in the show notes, as well as a free copy of the Think by Design ebook and everything else you need at lifebydesign.com/podcast. Find today's episode. And thank you for joining the drive to 1 million families worldwide living life by design.